Hi, it's Tuesday night at 6:30, so it's time for What We're Reading. I'm Penny Gable, librarian at the Ada branch of KDL, and tonight I have with me Dr. Patrick Prominski, who is a professor of English at Grand Rapids Community College. So I've got the academic viewpoint today. Dr. Prominski, you have to tell me, what are you assigning your students these days? What are they reading? Because probably not what I read when I was in school.
Oh, sure. And thanks for having me on. Most of what I do at GRCC is teach writing, so we don't have a lot of opportunity to read. But there is one thing that we're having a lot of our intro students read, and that's this book. It's called Voices from the Rust Belt. Let's get it there, by Anne Trubick.
Voices from the Rust Belt. Is that nonfiction?
Yeah, it is. It's nonfiction. It's a collection of short essays about living, well, here and in Ohio and Indiana and Pennsylvania. And it's written mostly by sort of regular people. There aren't any huge names in that book, any huge names that you'd recognize as authors. And so you get really honest remembrances of growing up and living in this part of the country, which is really great for our students because they've never been outside Grand Rapids in some cases. And so they're part in the country, and they seem to like it. So yeah.
Do you have them read that and then write their own stories from the Rust Belt?
In my class, I do have them write about some of their own stories and reflections to these ideas that come up in the book. One of the essays talks about sort of the emptying of Detroit along racial lines, and told from a children's point of view. And so I have them respond to that and talk about whether or not they've experienced anything like that themselves.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. Okay, what else are you having them read?
Well, in my writing class, not much, but I'm teaching Introduction to British Literature this semester, which, okay, so there's a lot of things that we just have to get through, but we're also reading Zadie Smith, Hilary Mantel, Kazuo Ishiguro. These are all authors who probably familiar with. Zadie Smith wrote.
I don't think of any of them as British literature. They're all from England?
Yeah. Ishiguro moved there when he was a child, but okay. Some of them were born there. The book also.
I read Shelley. I got the fuzzy end of this lollipop.
The book also does some blurring. There's a couple of Canadian authors in there. Margaret Atwood is in there, and we could argue whether or not she's British. We're not reading her. I don't think she is. But yeah, Ishiguro wrote Remains of the Day. He's a Nobel Prize winning author, so we're reading one of his short stories, and so it'll be interesting to see how my students react to somebody like that, who's really very complex in his approach. So yeah.
Can you tell me, because you've had a couple classes, I know you're mostly doing writing now, but have you assigned anything for your students to read that they've all really loved?
They've all really, surprisingly, last semester I taught poetry, and Allen Ginsberg's long poem Howl, I assigned them to read, thinking it was going to be a disaster. I love it, but I thought that they would all just despise it because it's so long and there's a lot to it. And almost universally, they came back and they talked about how much they loved reading it.
Really?
Which was a really nice surprise for me.
Yeah. What have you had them read that they hated? Would they tell you that?
I try to get them to tell me that. Mostly, if it's before like the 20th century, they don't like it. It's too hard to get into. Voices from the Rust Belt, that I get a lot of students that say they just don't like it because they don't like reading nonfiction.
Okay.
No matter how entertaining I think it is or try to make it, they just don't like reading nonfiction. So it's a mixed bag. A lot of my students also say they're not readers. They just don't read. They haven't read since they had to, was the last time they read a book.
Did you see that as a challenge to try to give them suggestions, or send them to the library and read well?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I tell them to use the library. I tell them you could try a book, and if you don't like it, try a different book.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So before I move on to what you're reading, do you have anything else to tell us about your students?
Not really. I think that what they do read, the ones that are readers, read a lot like the other parts of the population, a lot of the adult population. So they're reading bestsellers. They're reading books that are movies, those kinds of things. There's no surprise.
One question for you. When I was in school, and I was an English major, of course, because I'm a librarian, we had the canon that we were reading, and we called it that, and we considered it the only thing worth reading, really. How has that changed?
Well, it's changed a lot. Like I said, I'm teaching British literature 2, and there's just 2 levels of British literature, 1 and 2, and there really needs to be 3 or 4, because this book that I'm teaching, it's around here somewhere, but it's, you know,
right.
and it covers everything from 1800s to now, and I have to skip over large chunks of things because we just can't read it. It's a lot more inclusive, which is fantastic, but the editors tend to be inclusive without getting rid of anything, which is problematic when you're a 2,000-page book to 18-year-olds in 4 weeks. So that's a lot how it's changed.
Daunting.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So when you're in your spare time and you don't have your professor hat on, what do you like to read?
I read, I read a little bit of everything. Right now I'm reading Frank Herbert's Dune because it's going to be a movie again for the 2nd or 3rd time. And I'd read it like 20 years ago, but I didn't remember any of it, and I intend to see the movie, so I wanted to read it again. So I'm reading Dune. And I'm enjoying it. I realized that I'd forgotten large chunks of that book, so it's like reading it new for me again.
I have to pop in here because we have started a new collection at KDL, and we're piloting it at the Ada branch when that opens. It's called the KDL Core Collection. And that collection is like express books. And express books at the library are there, even though there's a million holes on them, you might find an express copy there, because express are new copies of that book that can't go for holes. Well, we decided that we want to try some of the older books that are super popular, like Dune is one of our core titles.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's an express copy, so they'll be on the shelf a lot more often, and you don't have to wait for a hold. Sometimes there's holds on those books when they get popular and there's a movie again, and it's all shiny new copy, and it's very exciting. So when Ada opens up, which is the end of January, come check out the pilot. Tell us what you think of the core collection. It's going to be fun. So I had to get that plug in. So sorry.
Oh yeah. And Dune is one of those science fiction classics that has actually aged well. I was really concerned when I picked it back up how it will have aged, and it's pretty good. They did an okay. He did an okay job. So yeah.
And I have to tell everybody, all of my watchers, that Professor Prominski used to work at the East Grand Rapids Library.
Yes. Yeah.
So what did you used to recommend that the people read back when you worked at East Grand Rapids?
Probably Dune. I probably recommend What did I recommend? Well, I recommended a lot of bestsellers from 10 years ago when I worked there. So I'm not sure how much of that would be relevant anymore. Yeah.
So nothing stayed with you?
I love just sort of regular literary fiction. And so Howard Norman, he wrote a book called The Bird Artist, which I loved. I did a book, I think I did like a book talk on it or something when I worked at East Grand Rapids. He has consistently remained one of my favorite authors. It's literary fiction. His stories are sometimes disturbing, but they're not horror disturbing. They're more like, oh, those are horrible people kind of disturbing. And he's just a really all-around great author. So he's an author that I would still probably recommend if I were still at the library.
Great. And I know you've got books there. Do you have any you haven't shown us yet?
Oh, I've got a ton of books I haven't showed you. There's a couple, that I'm really excited about. There's this book here. This is called The Boatman. The author's name is Billy O'Callaghan. He's an author who lives in Cork, Ireland.
Okay.
I was then going to add that he's an Irish author, but I think that's implied there. He's really big in Ireland. He's making his way to the States. A couple of his books have been published here. The Boatman is a collection of short stories. The Dead House is kind of a horror novel. And then he's got a regular sort of fiction novel called My Coney Island Baby, which is really excellent. He's just a fantastic author. Again, like Howard Norman, he's a very literary sort of author. The Boatman, all of those stories are clearly set in Ireland. So if you like Ireland, if you like the countryside, that kind of thing, sort of traditional Irish stories, I really love his work. He's one of my newer favorite authors.
What else have you got there?
A book that I started called Makeshift by Joe.
Stories.
Yeah.
Do you find you have short attention span right now with COVID? I mean, the short stories and the essays, good choice right now.
They are. They keep me, if I only have a few minutes. And the Makeshift book, some of them are, it's a collection of stories, but they sort of all run together. So it's more like a cycle. You have to like modern short stories, like contemporary short stories. Some of them are more literary. And then there's like little stories that are one page long that are based on like TV commercials. There's one that's based on a Subway commercial. And they interrupt the book. And so you have to be into that. If you're not, yeah. But he's local. He teaches at Interlochen, local-ish. Interlochen's up north. But and so, yeah, I've been really interested in reading that and happy with what I found inside. Yeah.
Okay. Have we come to the bottom of your stack yet?
We got one more because, I wanted to round things out. So like everyone else during COVID, I needed something to do. So I took up woodworking. Yeah, Nick Offerman, Parks and Rec. He owns a woodworking shop in Los Angeles and has for years and years and years. And so, I'm horrible. I'm terrible at woodworking. I'm not any good. But good, clean fun. It's got a lot of stories in it about just working with wood and his family and things like that. So it's a book of essays and also how to be a woodworker.
So is it serious? He's not being a comedian in the book?
No, he is. The writing is funny, but the projects in it are serious. There are plans to make everything from like a little stool to a dining room table to a bed frame to just really complex things. Yeah.
And so anything that you tried to make?
What's that?
Can you show us anything you tried?
I will not show you anything I tried to make. You're actually not in this room. I made a horrible stool. It stands, but it's not any good. And I made a serviceable end table that is just fine. So, yeah. And I still have all my fingers. So,
Good for you.
That's important.
Oh, so at the end of the show, I always have people one more time hold up all the books you show them.
Okay, let's see. I'll get this right by the end. Makeshift by Joe Saxtetter.
Okay.
Dune by Frank Herbert.
Nice. That's a good copy.
Yeah, I lost my other one. This is from the Rust Belt by Ann Trubick. The Boatman by Billy OCallaghan. And Good Clean Fun by Nick Offerman.
Wonderful. So Dr. Prominski is assigning all of those books to everybody.
I write your 3 to 5 page thoughts on them. No, please don't do that.
Because she's not going to read them.
I won't. I have too much other work to do.
Well, thanks so much. We'll see you next week for what we're reading. Wave bye-bye now.